greatest of the Byzantine emperor, the villain, hero, you decide. Now, talking about the stability of the Byzantine Empire. And we can see this in how transitions between one emperor and another done. Anastasius, the emperor, dies in 518. He has no children, so he has no clear heir. This time, it's a man named Justin, who is his bodyguard. Justin had come to Constantinople years earlier, joining the army. He is from a Latin-speaking village in the hills of the Balkans, roughly in what's now Serbia, near the border with Kosovo. He has risen up in the ranks until he is in command of the imperial bodyguard in the palace. Now, Justin is in the bedroom at the bedside of Anastasius when he dies. He has in his possession Anastasius's signet ring and other marks of his office as emperor. Because he holds these, when the cabinet, main ministers and military leaders around Anastasius gather to pick the new emperor, it's clear that Justin will have a significant role. One of these generals approaches him, gives him a large sum of money, saying, I want you to throw your support behind me when we select which one of us will become emperor. Justin agrees, and when the meeting comes, Justin announces that since Justin, has the ring and everything else, he is now emperor, and that general tried to bribe him, tried to overthrow the legitimate emperor, and has the general in prison. Now, of course, the general didn't think Justin would do it because Justin can't read. He has no children. He himself is 70 years old. He is not considered one of the obvious prospects. But now he is emperor, and he knows he cannot trust everyone around him. But he can be trusted. He can trust his nephew. And that nephew, Peter Sabatius, had come down from their home village to Constantinople as a teenager. Justin had made sure that Peter had a very good education, funding his education in law, his rise through the military, so that Peter has extremely good skills as a military thinker, as a lawyer, as a public speaker, and has risen up in authority within Constantinople. Of course, the fact that his uncle is the chief bodyguard of Anastasius does not hurt at all as Peter makes his way up. And Justin knows he can trust Peter never to take the side of one of the other people in court. Peter is adopted by Justin as his son and his heir. And while Justin lives, Peter will be Justin's main aide, the person he trusts most. Peter will change his name from Peter Sabatius to Justinian. When Justin dies, Justinian will become emperor, 527. He will rule for 38 years, longer than any other emperor. He will become famous. He will be known as a conqueror, a lawgiver, a builder, and as the subject of some of the most outrageous stories of the Byzantine Empire. Here he is with his chief religious and military leaders around him at the height of his powers. Now, before we get into some of his achievements, we need to spend a moment talking about one of the first major challenges Justinian will face. It starts with horse racing. Gladiatorial games have been outlawed and disappeared. It's too violent. You know, but spectator sports are still needed. And the most popular entertainment and sport, Constantinople and throughout the Byzantine Empire, is chariot racing. The Hippodrome in Constantinople is the greatest spot to watch these races. Can seat up to 120,000 people, the city of probably 600,000. There are 4 teams that regularly compete. They're known by the colors they wear, the colors that their fans wave while they're watching their teams. The blues, the greens, the whites, and the reds. Each of the 4 teams is backed by a different political faction, and it being the Byzantine Empire, that also means a different religious faction. The 2 most significant are the blues and the greens. The reds and the whites are, the teams that most often lose. Now, each of these factions, called the circus factions, are also involved in criminal activity and regular violence. The fan clubs, the circus fan clubs, the greens and the blues, run most illegal drinking establishments, prostitution, things like that in the city of Constantinople. They have toughs, rough and ready guys who are willing to enforce their monopolies on these trades. And we're told, in the time of Justinian, you could spot these guys from their distinctive haircuts. They cut their hair in the style of the Huns, short and spiked on the top of their heads, and grown long in the back. In other words, mullets. As well as wearing their gang colors, either green or blue. On days of major races, there would be massive fights, battles between the 2 organizations in the streets of Constantinople. Regularly, people are killed, and this is basically gang warfare, done with knives and swords rather than with guns. Now, these are both, again, groups involved in criminal activities. Some of their leaders from both groups are arrested right around Christmas in 531, put jailed and taken to the Asian side of the Bosphorus. This has got both groups upset. They want their leadership freed, and they gather on a race day, January 13th, 532. Now, the Hippodrome, you can see it there in the center, is located adjacent to the imperial palace. From Justinian's home, just walk down a corridor to the emperor's seats in the stands, which matters. Emperors frequently attend races. Now, the crowd gathers, and the crowd begins, with the normal cheering, of one, go greens, go blues, and so on and so forth. But then someone begins shouting insults against the emperor himself. Very quickly, this spreads to both groups, greens and blues, chanting against Justinian. They begin shouting over and over again. Nika, same word as Nike, means victory in Greek. They take over the stands, and the fans go out into the city. Riots will last for 5 days across Constantinople. There will be massive fires Much of the center of the city is destroyed. Justinian himself cannot leave his palace for fear of the violent crowds going through and attacking people, because the two factions, the Greens and the Blues, have made a peace with each other with the goal of overthrowing the government, freeing their leaders, getting their demands done. Justinian's terrified. He thinks about packing up and going out the back door, crossing over the Bosphorus to Asia, where one of his military units is waiting. His wife, Theodora, tells him as he's preparing to leave that the imperial purple would make a good winding cloth. That is, if he goes, he will die and he can be buried as an emperor. She'll stay and deal with the crowds. And if he were a man, so would he. He takes her advice. He puts out word to all of the rioters, the members of both factions, that he is going to agree to their demands and will give a speech in the Hippodrome itself, talking about how he has agreed to all of this. Meanwhile, those soldiers who were just across the Bosphorus will start being brought across to the back of the palace. Once the rioters have gathered in the stadium, soldiers will surround them and block the entrance. They enter the stadium and go to work. They kill all the members of the Greens and the Blues that they can find. Justinian addresses the crowd that is now deceased. He has ended the Nika revolt. He has brought order back, but at an incredible cost. He has killed a huge segment of the population of its own capital itself. And large parts of the capital are in ruin. So he begins rebuilding. And some of the works that he does are still evident. The largest church, Hagia Sophia, in Constantinople had burned down during the riot. He has a space cleared, and this building put in its place still stands. The minarets were added 1,000 years later. When it is completed, the new church of the Hagia Sophia will be the largest church built, the largest church for centuries to come. The dome on it is the largest dome to be built before the last 200 years. When it is completed, Justinian will say at the dedication, Solomon, I have outdone you, because he believes he has built the most magnificent temple for God yet. Indoors, it is the largest space anywhere in the world of open space inside a building. Here you can see how it looks today. And get a sense of the vastness of the building itself. The walls, the ceiling, when it is new, are covered with mosaics and other works of art. Probably the walls would have glowed with some of the gold on them. Much of this art will be destroyed in the centuries to come, some by the Byzantines themselves. Much of it was painted over in the 15th century when the church was converted into a mosque and has only been uncovered in recent decades. A few months ago, it was turned back into a mosque. Also, on the walls, there's a lot of graffiti, about 1,400 years worth of graffiti. You can find inscriptions made by Vikings. You can find inscriptions in Greek, Armenian, Arabic, Turkish, Latin. You name a language spoken around the Mediterranean, you could find it today. I was pointing out at this, but it's not really visible. the runic inscriptions on the wall. Now, having built this magnificent church, Justinian has other things he needs to do to strengthen his rule. Next, he sets forth to reorganize the law and clarify it. By his time, the Roman state has already existed for over 1,200 years, and there have been many, many laws written in that time. Many of them contradict each other. Justinian commissions two of his advisors, Tribonian and Theophilus, to put together all the texts of the laws and determine what is still law. And when they're finished, they create a massive law code called the Corpus Juris Civilis, or the civil law, also known as the Code of Justinian. It has 4 parts in it. The first part is a 12-volume compendium of every Roman law that is still in effect, from the time of Romulus to the time of Justinian. These include laws outlawing paganism and incorrect Christian worship. They put together a second group called the Digest, 50 volumes, having all the Roman laws that are still in existence, broken down by topic with explanations and showing where the code comes from. Finally, since this is quite a lot, they issue a 4-volume short version called the Institutes that is basically a guide to understanding the principles of Roman law and how to follow them. A 4th part will be added, called the Novellae, an additional 153 constitutions and laws passed by Justinian himself. It's a massive amount of law. It's, this shelf kind of gives you an idea. Now, these laws of Justinian will become the main source of Roman law that will be in effect going forward. It is not superseded in countries that use Roman law as their basis until 1805, or is it 1803, when the Code Napoleon is issued. The Code of Justinian is still the basis of the legal system in a number of places, and is still in effect in Quebec, Scotland, and I believe in South Africa. And all other laws, almost every other law in effect derives from this work. There is a portrait of Justinian in the American Supreme Court for this reason. Now, having reformed the law and the building and his building projects, Justinian is not done. If he had stopped at this point, he would still be known as a great emperor. This is where his best friend comes in, Belisarius. Belisarius is a friend of Justinian's from the time he first arrived in Constantinople. 2 men were married to 2 women who were also best friends, Antonina and Theodora. The account of who set up whom with the other is disputed. There's more than one version, but it's agreed that when they were both relatively insignificant figures in the Byzantine government, both low-ranking officers, they had married the 2 women. And the 4 of them will work together to change the Roman world. Belisarius is considered one of the greatest generals in history. He has waged a successful war against the Persians in the first years of Justinian's reign. It is the army returning from Persia that Justinian brings into the city to crush the rebellion. It is Belisarius who is in command. Now, in the aftermath, Justinian realizes a successful war would distract people from some of the problems they face. And he is the emperor of all the Roman Empire, even if he only controls the eastern half. So, when a crisis emerges in North Africa, a king has been overthrown and murdered by one of his relatives who's become king in his place. Justinian dispatches Belisarius with an expeditionary force to North Africa. They land south of Carthage, they march north, defeating the army of the Vandals on their way in open battle. Then a few days later, attacking Carthage itself, again, incredibly successfully. So fast, in fact, that Belisarius and his officers sit down to lunch in the palace in Carthage with the food that had been set out for the last Vandal king, Thrasimund. North Africa is brought back into the Roman Empire, as well as the various islands the Vandals had ruled. Of course, bringing North Africa back in means conflicts with those independent kingdoms of the Moors that had reemerged, and that conflict will take several decades before North Africa is fully brought to peace. However, that is not immediately clear. There's another 50 years of fighting ahead. Instead, Belisarius returns to Constantinople. There, he celebrates the first Roman triumph, the first conquest of another kingdom to have happened in centuries. He is now the hero of the day. Justinian looks even stronger with Belisarius as his right hand. And they begin thinking, if they could conquer the Vandals so swiftly, surely they could get the key area of the Roman Empire, Italy itself. In 535, another pretext is given. Amalasuntha, the queen of the Ostrogoths, daughter of Theodoric, is murdered in her bath. The charge is put on her cousin having done it. And Belisarius is dispatched to southern Italy, conquering first Sicily, and then moving north up the peninsula till he enters the city of Rome itself. The Ostrogoths have their capital at Ravenna, further north. And at first, the war seems to be going well, but then it slows down. Having landed in 535, it takes 5 years instead of a few weeks to capture Ravenna, the capital of the Goths. Because, unlike the Vandals, they're more Ostrogoths. They are better organized. They are better fighters. And they are far more popular with the people that they rule than the. In fact, as the Roman army moves north, other groups volunteered to fight for the Goths. The Jewish community of Italy begs the Goths to give them weapons so they can fight by their sides. Now, having captured Ravenna, Belisarius returns in victory. However, the war does not end. As soon as he leaves Italy, the Goths rebel. The war continues for another 12 years. The last Goths are still fighting for their independence 10 years after that. And this war is destructive. Rome is depopulated. At one point, Rome fought over, first captured by Belisarius from the Goths, recaptured by the Goths from Belisarius, captured once again by Belisarius. The population of the city of Rome reaches 0. And Rome is now destroyed when a Roman army liberates it. Italy sees its population collapse uh, by about 75% during this war, 27-year war that leaves most of Italy destroyed. Justinian does send the fleet even further west, attacking the Visigoths, capturing the southern cities of Spain and the northernmost tip of Africa. Uh, it seems like other campaigns were planned. There's some evidence that had the war in Italy gone successfully, they would have moved on to conquer the Visigothic kingdom, the Frankish kingdom, and even thought about returning Britain to the Roman Empire. However, the Italian War prevents that. Now, all that said, let's talk about Justinian's wife. There she is with her ladies in waiting. Antonina, Belisarius' wife, is immediately to the right of the Empress. She is an extremely powerful woman. She is probably one of the most powerful women in this period. She is constantly at her husband's side, giving him advice, counsel, advising policies in war and in peace. And she's the subject of lots and lots of rumors. Many people may have heard some of the more famous. She is supposedly was a prostitute and an exotic dancer before seducing Justinian. These stories are quite detailed. Her father was involved in the Greens, according to these stories. He trained bears to dance and fight. After he died, her mother was left with 3 daughters to provide for, and the older 2 daughters became prostitutes to support the family. Theodora was too young at the time and was very disappointed that she could not do the same, instead just holding the clothes for the customers of her older sisters. When she became older, she became an insatiable prostitute. She would have a show on stage where she would strip down and did strange things with a swan. Afterwards, she'd go upstairs to her dressing room and sleep with every man in the audience. When they were all spent, urged them to send up their servants, and is supposed to have said that she blamed God that she only had 3 holes that could be satisfied at a time. Not making this up, or am I? These stories come from the historian, the next person we need to discuss. His name's Procopius. He came from the city of Caesarea in Palestine. He wrote 3 books: The Wars of Justinian, Buildings of Justinian, and The Secret History. Belisarius was the secretary and personal assistant. Procopius was the secretary and personal assistant of Belisarius. He traveled with him. Many of the details of his campaign we get from Procopius because Procopius was there. Procopius was in the palace while they were deciding what to do about the riots. He was next to the general when they captured Carthage. And when we look at details from the history that can be found anywhere else, they check out from the wars, that is. The second book he writes, The Buildings, shows how Justinian is a great builder. These 2 books give a very high image of Justinian, the hero, Belisarius, the hero. And then there's The Secret History. The Secret History was lost. It's written by Procopius. It tells us other things. It talks about how terrible Justinian is, how terrible Theodora is, how evil Belisarius was. In it, we learn that Justinian killed for fun and profit. He would come up with laws to punish people simply so that he could seize their estates. He made laws against homosexuality so that he could seize the property of men who were involved in it. He is supposed to have killed, along with his wife, who also liked killing people. The two of them were supposed to have killed 1 trillion people. They're probably even the highest estimate of the world's population of the time puts it in the range of about 700 million. Trillion is a lot more. According to Procopius, Justinian would take his head off at night, tuck it under his arm, and walk around the palace because he did not sleep at all, because he was a demon in human form. Now, this is the source for all the stories about Theodora, the actress, the prostitute, the adult entertainer. They all come from here, with other than 2 sentences that say that she was not a great person. Elsewhere, we would learn that she was the daughter of a Syrian priest, that she was a deeply religious woman. If we did not have the secret history, if it had remained lost, as it was for at least 700 years, until being found in the library of the Vatican, we would have no reason to think any of this. But why would Procopius have written this? Why would someone who knew all of this write something like this? There are lots of theories. One is that he thought that Justinian was about to be overthrown, and he knew if he as someone who was deeply connected to everyone in the government, would be likely to be killed. If he could turn around and say, see, look, I was always against them, he might go free. Or that he had come to hate his employers. I mean, this would be almost like finding something where the same person wrote a book of Obama or Trump or whomever about how he was the greatest president ever, and then turned around and wrote about how he was the most evil person ever. And of course, do we believe these stories? Can we believe all negative stories told about leaders? Everything, if it's in print, it's got to be true, right?